What I'm going to do in this part of the lecture is look at some important refinements to the measurement of gross domestic product, aspects of gross domestic product that we are also going to use quite extensively during our course. The first of these is a measurement issue, and it's a very, very important measurement issue. And I want to take the following example. I'm going to suppose in a particular economy there are only two commodities that are produced, cheese and wine. What I'm going to explain here will generalise to a real world where there are many thousands, perhaps millions of commodities. But I can make my point in this simple example with just cheese and wine. And I want to look at the calculation of GDP over four distinct periods, 2009, 2010, 2011 and 2012. And I'm going to focus on the expenditure interpretation of GDP, but obviously it doesn't really matter that much. When I say expenditure, I could just as equally have said production or income. So let me just fill in this table a little bit. We'll suppose there are 100 kilos of cheese produced in 2009. The price is 15. The value is simply price times quantity. Now, I'm going to introduce a little bit of terminology here. When I make a calculation like that, I'm talking about what is known as the current value. What I mean by current value is that I'm taking the quantity in that period and valuing it at that period's price. So that value of 1500 is the current value of cheese in the sense that we've taken the 2009 quantity and valued it at the 2009 price. You'll see why that's important shortly. We'll put in some numbers for wine, 25, 22, and a value of 550. And we'll just fill in the rest. Total GDP in 2009 will be the sum of those two values. Think of that as the final expenditure on cheese and wine over that year in this economy. We'll just make up some numbers for the following years. So we have a series of numbers for GDP, one for each of those years. And those numbers are going to be given a special name. When we calculate GDP in this way, we're going to refer to that as the economy's nominal GDP. Nominal GDP equals the sum for each commodity in the economy. Now in this case we only have two. The sum of the current price times the current quantity. Now remember, by current I mean that for each particular year I've valued the quantities in that year by the price that was current in that year. So this nominal GDP in 2009 is reflecting the prices in 2009. Nominal GDP in 2010 reflects the prices in 2010. Now, doing this exercise is actually quite significant in a sort of very fundamental way. Let me just highlight what we're doing here. We're using those current prices to value the quantities in each year. One way of thinking about what's happening here is we're using those current prices to, let's call it, weight the commodities each year. You can think about what's going on here as follows. For a given quantity, commodities with a higher price will therefore be given a higher weight in the calculation of GDP. So let me just repeat that. For a given quantity, commodities with a higher price will receive a larger weight in the calculation of GDP. That's actually not a trivial statement. It reflects one of the core beliefs that economists have about market economies. That is that the price of a commodity, in some meaningful fundamental sense, reflects the social value of the resources that comprise that commodity. The whole point about a market economy, when it functions well, is that prices reflect the true social value of goods and services. So when we say we are going to weight commodities according to their current price, so that for given quantities, commodities with a higher price receive a higher weight, is actually saying something about our belief in the legitimacy of a market economy to deliver prices that in some real sense reflect true social values. So resources that are valued highly by society as reflected in a high price are going to receive a high weight in the calculation of GDP. So that sounds like a pretty good thing, but there is one drawback to this current price calculation, this nominal GDP. And I'll take another example to illustrate this quite dramatically. Let's just use apples and oranges with clearly made up numbers. Now look carefully at that table. You'll notice a few things. First of all, for both apples and oranges, the quantities are increasing through time. Secondly, for both apples and oranges, the prices are decreasing through time. And the third thing is, if you do the nominal GDP calculation, exactly as we have done in the previous slide, you'll see that nominal GDP, now remember I'm going to use the letter Y as my shorthand for nominal GDP, is trending down. Now, why is this a problem? It's a problem because when you see nominal GDP trending in this way, in this case it's trending down, you're never exactly sure what it is you're seeing. Is it because the price is changing? Or is it because the quantity is changing? Is it being driven by price? Is it being driven by quantity? If all you were looking at was nominal GDP, how would you know? Here, nominal GDP is falling, but it's disguising the fact that quantities are increasing. So nominal GDP has this disadvantage that when we look at what's happening to nominal GDP, we actually aren't really sure what's happening at all. Is it prices changing? Is it quantities changing? Perhaps they're both changing. Perhaps, as in this case, one is going up, one is going down. Who knows what's going on? And so using nominal GDP as an indicator of economic activity can be problematic. We simply don't always know how to interpret it. There is a solution, however, to this. The solution is to not use nominal GDP, but to use another concept, a concept known as real GDP. The way real GDP works as follows. We'll take the same apples and oranges example, but I'm going to choose one particular year. It doesn't actually matter which year you choose. I'm just going to choose 2009, and I'm going to declare that to be the base period. And I'm going to declare the prices that existed in that base period to be the base prices. In this case, for apples, it's 10. For oranges, it's 15. And what I'm going to do in my calculation of real GDP is, as we progress through time to 2010, 2011 and 2012, I'm going to value the quantity of apples in each of those years using that fixed base price. And for oranges, I'm going to value the quantity of oranges as we go forward in time using that fixed base price. And I've done that calculation in the table for you, and you'll note that what we have with our real GDP is now an upward trend. And why we have that is we have, in this calculation, eliminated the effect of price changes. We must have eliminated the effect of price changes because we've held the price fixed at its base value throughout all other periods. Which means when we look at what is happening to real GDP, we know by definition that a change in real GDP must be reflecting a change in quantity, because price and price changes can have no role. Now, for most purposes, macroeconomists are interested in real GDP because ultimately we're interested in the quantities of goods and services that are available to the economy, that are being produced in the economy. So nearly always in economic analysis, it's real GDP that we're going to be focusing on. And we're going to focus on it because when we see real GDP change, we know we are looking at changes in quantities. We don't have to worry about whether we're looking at price changes or quantity changes or some combination of the both. It has to be quantity change. There is one aspect to this real GDP calculation I want you to be aware of, one potential problem with the technique I described on the previous slide. So when we use those base period prices, and we use those prices to value goods and services for all subsequent periods, what we're doing is we're freezing the price weights at their base values. You'll recall when we talked about nominal GDP, about how commodities in the economy are weighted according to their price, and I argued, well, that was actually a pretty good thing as long as you accept that prices are a legitimate measure of the social value of commodities. But of course, the social value of different commodities can change through time for a variety of reasons. By using base prices, what we're essentially saying is that those changes can't happen. And that's not necessarily appropriate, particularly as we move further and further away from that base period. Now, there is a solution to this, and I don't want to go into detail because the calculation is actually quite complicated. But if you were to look up the real GDP figures in your National Statistical Agency's databases, you'll find probably a reference to what's called a chain volume index. Now, what a chain volume index does, and it's actually a fairly complicated calculation, is it moves that base forward year by year, so that each year you're valuing that year's quantities using the prices from the previous year. So you're never getting too far away from the base period. Essentially, you're updating the base period each period, moving it forward by 1 year. Now, for our purposes, we don't have to worry about that too much. It's not going to change anything that we do. The concept of real GDP, however, both as I've described it, but also using this chain volume index, that concept is essentially the same. That what we do with real GDP is we want to take price changes out of the calculation so that when we see a change in real GDP, we know we're looking at a quantity change only.